That's a good idea.
Okay, welcome this afternoon. This afternoon, we're gonna be doing a flyby of the housing bill, particularly as it relates to the Vermont Home Improvement Program. And potentially some questions around the definition of shelter, which has come up, in these hallway conversations and emails. So we're just going to do a quick run around the room so that everybody knows who all is here. I'm Teresa Wood from Waterbury, and I also serve Bolton, Beal Score, and Huntington.
Ann Donahue, Northfield and Berlin.
Hi, good afternoon. I'm Dan Noyes. I represent Wolcott, Hyde Park, Johnson, and Belvedere.
Hi, good afternoon. Eric McGuire, represent Rutland City.
Brenda Steady, East Milton, Westford.
Jeff Bishop, Colchester, the mentee of the esteemed Representative Mark Mahaly.
I take full responsibility.
I don't know if we want to do that. I don't have a trouble creating here.
Oh,
It's me now.
yeah.
Hi, I represent Brandon.
I'm Zon Easton, I represent Guilford and Vernon.
Esme Cole, Hartford. Kimberly McGill, I represent Bridgeport, Middlebury, New Haven, and Weybridge.
Ray Garofano, I live in Essex, also represent Essex Junction.
Lauren Morse, committee assistant.
Okay.
Hi, Beverly.
Oh, Beverly, I didn't see Beverly. And you were hiding behind Beverly.
Sure. Beverly will get Vermont Charter Advocacy Alliance.
Beg folks actions. Part of all interactions are. Billy Marvel, Director of Communications and Legislative Affairs for Children and Families. I'm Cindy Lowry with the Crossing Group.
Great. Sean, why don't you introduce yourself on the, there you go. Good morning.
Certainly.
Afternoon,
Good
sorry.
afternoon. We made it to the afternoon. Good afternoon,
Yeah.
everyone. My name is Sean Gilpin. I am the Director of the Housing Division at the Department of Housing and Community Development.
Okay, great. And then what would be great is if the two of you could review with us the language, which is on our website, I think, right?
Yes.
Okay.
It's a page 6. of the bill.
Your name?
Cameron,
Yeah, they're gonna introduce themselves in a second.
Yeah, okay.
So the floor is yours.
Thank you. So thank you so much, Madam Chair, and I'm delighted to be here. So I'm Mark Mahaly, and I represent Calais, Plainfield, and Marshfield, 3 towns. So I can't say that any one of them is the best town in Vermont. And I'm chair of the General and Housing Committee. Cameron?
Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel.
Nice to meet you, Cameron.
It's nice to meet you. It's my first time as.
No. Yeah.
So I'll tell you what, why don't I just give you a quick why are we doing this, sort of overview, and then Cameron can just walk you through it. There are 2 types of VHIP program without getting into all the history. Right now, there are 2 different Vermont VHIP programs. These are programs where they're very efficient in terms of producing housing. A landlord has a dilapidated unit that needs a lot of work. What VHIP does is pump up to 50 grand into the unit. And in return, there are certain conditions. The conditions are for the 5-year program, there's a 5-year program and a 10-year program. The 5-year program, the condition is you really have to give preference to someone emerging from homelessness. Wait, let me back up. Both the 5-year program and the 10-year program require that you rent the unit for what's called HUD fair market value, which is lower than real fair market value. So it's not, it's not super low income, but it's lower. Okay. The 5-year, you have to keep that requirement for 5 years. And then you can rent it out afterwards, clear of that requirement. The 10-year program, you got to rent it out at that level for 10 years. Okay. So the way the 5-year worked is that the 5-year says, and you have to give preference to people emerging from homelessness. And there's essentially 5 different, I think it's 5, Sean can correct me, providers that manage this process, like the Champlain Housing Trust is one of them. They manage this process, and there's something called the coordinated entry system, and it looks and tries to find a match so that the nonprofit provider and the coordinated entry system work together, and they match a low-income family or person to the unit size, et cetera, of the unit. And the 10-year program didn't have that requirement originally. But in order not to have, you didn't have the 10-year, you didn't have the homelessness obligation, but you had to keep the rent level low for 10 years rather than 5.
Mark, I just want to, I'm sorry for interrupting, but I just want to be clear with what the statute actually says.
I was going to get to what it is now, what it was last year, starting last.
Okay, all right. And I thought you were referencing that's what it was last year.
Okay, starting last year, the legislature put the homeless requirement on the 10-year. Okay? The department objects to that. They felt, I'm not going to put words in their mouth other than to say they felt like no one would do the 10-year program if it had the same requirements as the 5. So anyway, in their original draft of their housing proposal, the administration proposed simply to strike all the requirements for taking homeless people into the 10-year program and leave it in the 5-year program. So our concern in our committee was, wait a minute, everybody's going to go to the 10-year program and people are going to stop doing the 5-year program because they don't want to do the homeless work. The department testified that their connections with connecting landlords and homeless has worked really well. And they didn't think that was going to happen. And they do have, there's a reality to this, which is that originally there were plenty of Section 8 vouchers, so people could pay for the unit even though they were emerging from homelessness if they had a Section 8 voucher. And there are fewer of those, and there may be even fewer. It's getting harder and harder. But by and large, the program has worked. So I felt this was not acceptable, that we had to find middle ground between simply taking away all the homeless obligation on the 10-year program. I was worried that there'd be this migration away from the 5-year program to the 10-year program. So I asked the department to come up with a compromise. And they did. And we pressured them into a few additional things. And that's what's before you, which is basically a requirement. And I'll say it in one sentence, then you can walk them through it. It's just a requirement that says each year when you get an appropriation, like this year, the governor has $4 million in there. Oh, and it's always oversubscribed. Anyway, when you have an appropriation, 30% of it has to go to where the homeless, to either for the 5-year program or for the 5-year program. I think they could do one on the 10-year program as long as they did the homelessness thing, but 30% has to be for homeless. And that's essentially it. You want to walk them through it? That's the overview. I don't know, have I not covered something?
I think that you did. The only thing that I would add is, in the first revision, the connection with coordinated entry was taken out, and it's now been put back in. And that's important to this committee because that's how we continually, housing providers continually look to coordinated entry as a way to access appropriate referrals for whatever units that they might have available. So we thought that was important, and that has been added back in. The other thing that I would say is that this is also keeping this program consistent with VHCB, which is operating at roughly 30% of their units being set aside for people who are exiting homelessness. And so it's developing a consistent policy. And I do feel like the focus was very important as we were first implementing this program, and it was before the 10-year was available, to really find the matches that we could find. And I do know that there are people out there who have lost vouchers because they haven't been able to find a match. And so we don't want that to happen. So making sure that we can't just address, I know that there's this mantra, all we need is more units. Okay, that's not accurate.
You need some units.
We need more units, and we need the resources that go with those units, and we need to prioritize in some fashion people who are homeless if we're going to have a real impact on reducing the number of people who are homeless. So, I think it'll be up to, the committee discussion to decide whether this strikes that balance that people are looking for. And I feel like it does a pretty good job at doing that at this point in time.
I should add, if I might, you're going to see in the language, the intention of the department is, part of what's really important here is getting data. Because our committees, I have a feeling, are going to be working on this, not just this session, but next session as well, as we see how this plays out. And what you're going to see in here is they're working with the other agencies and determining, how is this working? Is it are we finding the homeless? Are there more homeless? I asked specifically, Sean, in our committee, what if it turns out that the program is oversubscribed? That is, what if it turns out that it's not 30%, that you could find 35%? And he said, we do 35%. In other words, 30% is a floor.
It's the floor, right?
And it's not, I don't feel like it's just his word, and because I feel like they have to report to us what's happening. And so we could be back here revisiting this, et cetera. Go for it.
All right, Madam Chair, may I share my screen?
Yes, that would be lovely. Thank you.
Okay. See, I struggle with this in your committee, so let's see if I can share the screen.
I'm sure you do a better job than I would do.
It works this time. It looks like we're good to go.
There you go.
Okay.
Can you make it a scope
Yes,
bigger?
yes.
Yeah.
This is at page,
We're gonna start on page 1.
Yeah, we're gonna start on page 1.
okay.
Bear with me. Is that
That's good.
gonna be big enough? Okay. Okay. We're not gonna do that way. We're gonna do it this way. Apologies. So, again, for the record, Cameron Wood, Office of Legislative Counsel. This is my first time in the committee, so, a little bit of introduction for you all. Just so you know, one of my portfolio areas is housing. Do cover some other areas, retirements and pensions, and consumer protection, bankruptcy, a few other smaller things, but housing is one of the biggest things in my portfolio. So it's nice to meet you all. If there's anything I can do to help you guys moving forward, please feel free to reach out. We are working through the Committee on General and Housing's committee bill. So that's why we don't have an actual House bill number at this point. So we're working off, you'll see at the top in the header, draft request 250838, draft 7.2. And, forgive a lot of the highlights in the bill. These are things that have been slightly tweaked and changed since the last time we worked with the House General Committee before your town meeting break. So we'll be going down there, as the chair mentioned, and doing a walkthrough here shortly of the changes that we've made. But I'm going to focus primarily here on section number 1, which, as you can see in the reader assistance heading on the bottom of that page, we're talking about the Vermont Rental Housing Improvement Program, otherwise known as VHIP. I'm going to walk through the changes that they've made real quick. Feel free to stop me, but I'm going to try to get towards the subsection that we've kind of been talking about here so far this afternoon with the committee. But for starters, section 699, this is in the creation of the program subsection. We're adding a requirement at the request of the administration to say that, as you may know, the money goes to the department and then they provide it out to these entities who then are granting that money out to landlords to actually do the work in the program. And so the request here, and Director Gilpin can probably speak to the intent better than I can, but my understanding it's basically saying, the nonprofits and the entities that are actually loaning out this money are not going to be considered licensed lenders for purposes of what they're doing here, right? They're not financial institutions, so we don't want to treat them as such for purposes of the money that they're lending out. Moving into subsection D, so the opportunity is to either receive $70,000 if you're going to bring a unit up to Vermont Access Rule accessibility requirements, or you can get $50,000 if you're simply bringing the unit online to other, kind of minimum standards. We're removing the 70 and we're simply combining it into the sub 2 here. So you can up to 50,000 and then up to an additional 20 to make the unit available to meet the visible standards outlined in the rules adopted by the Vermont Access Board. So not a significant change there, but a slight tweak. And happy to kind of talk about that if there's any questions.
I do have a question. Okay, you can go first, Representative Nielsen.
Are these loans or are these grants?
It could be either. So there are 3 ways the money can go out, either through a grant, through a 5-year forgivable loan, or a 10-year forgivable loan.
People, a lot of times, nonprofits are fine with a grant, and for-profits would prefer a loan because if they get a grant, they have to pay taxes on it.
So what does a forgivable loan mean?
It means that, like,
You don't have to pay it back.
it's like a grant.
I will direct the
That's
question.
kind of confusing.
No, it's okay. Your question may be best answered by Director Gilpin, so I'll let him answer when he testifies. My understanding is you get the loan, and then as long as you're complying with the requirements, as the chair mentioned, you have, if it's 5 years, you have this requirement of maintaining the unit for these populations for 5 years. Same thing on the 10-year. You have this 10-year requirement. So you're getting, there's a change in here to make it a prorated credit for the years in which you're maintaining with the program. So,
Thank you.
Representative McGill.
Yeah, I just want to clarify something because my Representative Mahaly, you had said the homeless requirement is not a requirement currently on the 10-year forgivable loan.
It is.
It is.
Not according to their website.
Yeah, but
I understand.
That's incorrect.
Statute has it, but they're not.
Oh,
Yeah, that this is something
Was it-
we had a conversation with the department. I followed up after the commissioner's comments in our committee when he was testifying here in H91 with regard to it being a priority but not a requirement. And Ledge Council found the language for me, and it's the exact same language as is in the 5-year program. And so it is actually a requirement. It is not how the department is implementing the program right now,
okay.
to be
and I'll get
honest.
to that
And,
language here in just.
yes, and Director Gilpin will speak to that in his comments as well.
Okay, so we are on page 3, subsection E. Before I move on, I guess.
Oh, yeah, I did have a
I think you had a question.
I did. Visitable standard. Is that different than habitable standard for accessibility?
Housing is new to
Yeah.
me. I do not have a background in housing, so I'm going to probably, that question may be best directed at Director Gilpin at this point. And he came off mute, so. he may-
Okay.
If you'd like me to answer now, I'm happy to provide some. So yes, it is above habitability standards. We worked with a number of organizations, including Department of Aging and Independent Living, VCIL, and the fire departments in order to figure out what the best standard was. And this is universally accepted as one of the best standards for what we're trying to attempt. So it is beyond just the habitability standards in a rental unit. It would actually allow for, at least on a first floor unit, to be entirely visitable by somebody in a wheelchair. So for instance, ramps up to the egress, ingress, doors and hallways wide enough that a wheelchair can move about, and things like that.
Thank you. That helps to clarify that. Thank you.
Okay, so page 3, we're on the subsection E, line 4 here. So this is where we're going to start to get into what are the requirements for the 5-year, and then subsequently what are the requirements for the 10-year program. And so, what you can see here is for the grants or the 5-year forgivable loans, a landlord shall coordinate with nonprofit housing partners and local, here's where we're making a change from local coordinated entry organizations to homelessness service organizations approved by the department. This is a recommendation edit from the department, so I would defer to them on what the intention is here. But what you can see is we're moving into the sub 2A. The land.
You deal back with coordinated entry further down in the language, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
So the 2A this is where the requirement is for, again, we're in the 5-year program. A landlord must lease the unit to an individual who is in one of these populations. So we have an individual exiting homelessness, actively working with an immigrant or refugee resettlement program, an individual with a disability who receives or, in the proposed change here, is approved to receive Medicaid-funded home and community-based services. And then moving to the top of page 4, sub 4, there is a request from the department to add, so among the populations that the landlord has to lease to, an individual with approval from the department in writing, an organization that will hold a master lease that explicitly states that the unit will be used in service of those populations. So instead of going to an individual, going to an entity that'll hold the lease on their behalf. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to jump down to subsection F on page 4. So we're on line 11 and moving down to the top of page 5. What you can see, and forgive the scrolling, just bear with me for a second. Mm-hmm. Now we're in the 10-year program. Now, as you can see, this language on page 5 is being struck. All of this language is similar to the requirement you just walked through in the 5-year. So the landlord shall lease to individuals who are within these populations. The request here is to strike all of that requirement for the 10-year, as the chair mentioned at the beginning of his walkthrough here. And we're going to add that the landlord shall, for a minimum of 10 years, the total cost, we're on line 15 here, the total cost of rent for the unit, including utilities not covered by rent payments, shall not exceed the applicable fair market rent established by Department of Housing and Urban Development. And except that a landlord may accept a housing voucher that exceeds fair market rent if that is available. So we're not trying to prohibit them from accepting a voucher if it so happens to be above the fair market rent here. So this is, one of the key changes. As the chair mentioned, the 5 and the 10-year program were similar, and they're both required to lease to these populations. For the 10-year, we're striking that, and we're adding this, that it has to be rented out for fair market rent. And so forgive me, I'm going to scroll down to page 6 because we're getting to the language that has been added over the past few days. As the chair mentioned, there was concern about removing that for the 10-year and the 5-year now kind of becoming obsolete if all of the landlords go to the 10-year, so they don't have to have the requirement of serving these populations or finding individuals who are going to be able to fill that requirement. So what is being proposed here is adding a new subsection G. As you can see, this is minimum funding for 5-year forgivable loans. Annually, the department will establish a minimum allocation of funding set aside to be used for 5-year grants or forgivable loans to serve the eligible households pursuant to that section. Remaining funds may be used for either the 5-year or the forgivable loan. And then the set aside shall be a minimum of 30% of the funds dispersed annually. So we're having this carve out to say 30% of those funds must be for the 5-year and therefore being eligible for those populations that were identified. The department shall consult with the Agency of Human Services in establishing the amount of the set aside, including the availability of housing vouchers, current need, the ability and desire of landlords, the support services available for landlords, and the prior uptake and success rate. And then this is key. This was some of the language that Madam Chair was mentioning just, earlier that we have been tweaking, over the past day or two. The department shall coordinate with the local coordinated entry lead agencies to direct referrals for those individuals or families to be housed pursuant to the 5-year grants or forgivable loans.
So the question that I have there about it being because the department doesn't really run this program, it contracts out to the home ownership centers, right? And so I'm trying to sort of figure out how that language, I'm looking for it here, how that language comports with paragraph E1 and talking about the landlord coordinating with the nonprofit housing partners and homelessness service organizations.
This language comes from
Yeah, I know, it came from DCF.
DCF.
That doesn't mean I can't ask the question.
Just as a point of information.
I realize that. I'm just, my question is, and maybe this is for you, Sean. So it says the department shall coordinate with the local coordinated entry lead agencies. Now, why wouldn't that be the the home ownership centers coordinating with the the coordinated entry lead agencies?
It's actually a great question. I believe the intention was that we would be the arbiters of opening up those communication channels, and we actually have, beyond just the statutory language, administrative program information about how this program is actually carried out, beyond this, that has more details than this. And I think that the language you're referring to speaks to us making sure that that's available, as opposed to just sending a landlord or a property owner off on their own. And we work regularly with the coordinated entry lead organizations and the home ownership centers to make sure that at least every month we're having meetings about that, probably twice a month, about those channels. So I think that intention is giving the responsibility to us, or endowing us with that responsibility to make sure that those communications are happening.
Okay, and what I'm hearing you say is that there's further direction that you have for the home ownership centers about how they administer the programs. And the home ownership centers are familiar, obviously, with the coordinated entry lead agencies, so that it's not something that's foreign to them at all. I was just kind of reacting to some emails that went through that said, the department actually not going to guarantee, or not guarantee, provide this, but I guess it's okay. I just was wanting to make sure that the
Yeah, Madam Chair, it's a nuance that definitely I'm surprised it's brought up, and it's absolutely valid. But yeah, we've seen this sub-3 as us making sure that the coordinated entries are aware of this program, are aware of our policies and processes, and we meet with them on the regular to make sure that they're engaged with the program.
And I think that, so what you just said makes perfect sense to me. I think the part about this that doesn't really make sense to me is to direct referrals for those individuals or families. You're not directing referrals, the home ownership centers are.
I just put home ownership centers in.
Well, I mean, I don't want to mess up a thought process here. I like the fact that the department holds some responsibility. Don't get me wrong. I like that, but I just am thinking,
So
the way it reads, it's that your department would be directing referrals to coordinated entry lead agencies.
So actually, I think, and forgive me if I'm reading this in a different way, but the local coordinated entry lead agencies direct referrals to the housing. We coordinate with them to make sure that they're aware of where they need to direct those referrals to.
Should we insert, Don? We could say it, the department shall coordinate. There's two ways to do it that I can think of, and I'm just trying to save time here.
Yeah, of course.
I mean, we're about to go downstairs and walk through the bill, and if there's some language change that we want to make it. So we could say either the department and what are they called? The local coordinating agencies shall coordinate, blah, 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 just add them in. Or we could say the department shall coordinate with the, what's the name for the local providers?
And that would be the local coordinated entry lead agencies. And respectfully, I think that this language actually it directs us to coordinate with what we call the CEs, and for them to then direct referrals for those individuals to be housed. And they direct those referrals to the homeownership centers and the private property owners.
Would you be amenable to revising that to say coordinate with the local coordinated entry lead agencies and the home ownership centers?
Certainly. Yeah. That's how it functions. Yeah, we'd be happy with that.
Makes it a lot.
That's what I
It makes it a lot clearer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Done. All right. Got it.
You're adding and homeownership centers there online.
Yeah, to direct, it's gonna say, shall coordinate with the local coordinated entry lead agencies and the home ownership
Centers.
centers. Okay. Got it. Go ahead.
Okay, there's really just two more.
Yeah.
I would just, one of mine and some feedback I've heard from folks is people are afraid that this is a little wishy-washy, and that there may allow for avenues outside of coordinated entry. So I'm just wondering if we could also add, with the local court to direct, referrals for those prioritized individuals or families to be housed. They're just really making it clear that this 5-year grant is only it must be used the coordinated entry system. There's
Suspenders,
yeah, that there are no other avenues through it or side channels. Coordinated entry exists because it creates an equitable system where no connections, everyone has a fair shot. It removes possibility of implicit bias, all sorts of things. It is really important, and it is part of this homeless system in Vermont. It is a really essential part of it, and I don't want to see it undermined. So yes, I'm just wondering if we can
suggest inserting prioritized in between the words those individuals.
For those individuals or families prioritized
To be
to
housed.
be housed.
Sean?
That sounds fine. Thank you.
Okay.
Thank you.
I don't see any concern with adding that. I'm happy to. Made a note. Makes sense to me. Forgive me, you all are much more knowledgeable about these programs than I am and the populations that we're dealing with. It is still going to tie back to the populations that you have in statute.
Yeah.
For the
Yes,
5 years.
yes,
So, okay,
yes.
just making sure that was
Yeah,
clear too. Yeah.
Which I may say, just forgive me, but it does include individuals and families who are recently resettled into the state that might need assistance. So working with a refugee resettlement agency, they likely would be the only ones outside of coordinated entry. And one other
Necessarily,
population, victims of domestic violence are not included in the coordinated entry system, at least in the traditional sense. And we'd like to make sure that they are.
They are, if they're homeless, they are, their name, as long as they've been, but the domestic violence, they're great about getting folks connected to resources. They have access to other resources, but they're in there. They're just, their name is like, I have access to for my other job, all of the coordinated entry data. I can't go in and view their names. It's only, they've got B4, is what their name is listed at. So they're on the master list. It's just their information is protected. They're still prioritized for opportunities, and they're still in coordinated entry and part of that process.
And
Okay.
can I ask, is there a
Yeah.
reason why the recently resettled programs would not be in coordinate? I mean, they should also
Yeah, I mean,
be,
I work,
anybody who is experiencing
The
homelessness
homelessness
should be in
there.
coordinated entry. So, I mean, that's, I think we're driving towards this, to use coordinated entry to pull people off. So we have one database. So just want to understand, is there a reason why they wouldn't be if Sean knows?
That probably not,
Not a
Sean,
quick
that's
question.
probably more of a question for DCF.
Yeah, and actually, Tracy Dolan at the Refugee Resettlement Office would be the best person to talk about what their status is when they arrive here.
Yeah. So I mean, we are aware of sort of all of the, I guess what I would call little side elements of individuals who are homeless, who might be eligible, things that would be contained here, like the
I would-
domestic violence, which are included in coordinated entry. And I don't know the answer, to be honest with you, about refugee.
are in, at least in honesty.
Yeah, I mean, I think what you're saying is that it's not uniform, the way it is for other individuals when it comes to refugees, would be my guess. Anne?
So I'm looking at the 2A that they shall lease the unit to a household R. That is, and the immigrant or refugee settlement program actively working, or even the person with a disability, that does not,
Yeah, what page?
sorry, page 3, starting line 10. That doesn't say that the members of the immigrant community or people with a disability need to be homeless.
Right.
So they may
Right.
not be in coordinated entry because they're not homeless.
That it does not say that they're homeless.
And these as priority individuals under 2A, therefore would be part of the prioritized individuals in that later section, but
Yeah,
wouldn't be in coordinated.
and that's
entry,
existing
right?
language. I don't
Yeah.
really have any desire to, I agree with you. I understand what you're saying. They may or may not be homeless.
Right, and so therefore they may or may not be in
Being
coordinated entry.
Yeah, yeah. Okay, I think we beat that one to death.
So I'm going to reorient us back to the bottom of page 6, top of page 7. So this is in the new subsection G that we're adding, which is the minimum requirements for the Department of Housing as it relates to these funds, setting aside the minimum of 30% for these 5-year grants or forgivable loans they'll be issuing. The last two subdivisions here are very straightforward. Funds set aside that are not utilized after 1 year shall become available for the 10-year. And then the top of page 7, sub 5, the department shall annually publish that amount on its website. And then the last change is the sub I on page 7, which is simply creating this revolving fund for the monies that do somehow come back to the department. As mentioned, I think the intention is most of them are grants or forgivable loans, so it's not expected that there will be a lot of money coming back, but conceptually there could be. So having that available to the department if they so choose to then issue those back. And those are the changes to the VHIP program. I'm happy to walk through another 28 pages if the committee would like.
You are. Emily is down there filling in your time right now.
Not really, but thank you. Thank you, Cameron. I appreciate that. So Sean, can you just give us your sort of overview, from the department's perspective? And, we've kind of been going back and forth, throughout our review of this language. So, feel free to give us your thoughts.
Madam Chair, can I have a question? Do you think it would be okay, I'm not sure it is, at some point to release Cameron, because I would, to go down and.
Yeah, oh, absolutely.
If you
I
need
think we're
anything
good.
else from me, please let me
Yeah,
know.
I'll get you.
Thank you, Cameron.
I'll text you, okay.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Nice to meet you as
It was
well.
a pleasure to be here.
Tell Ashley to go ahead.
Okay. That's a lot of power. I get to go in.
You do.
So
That's-
Tell them what
Tell her
to
to
do.
start the committee.
What can I say about people with power? I won't say it, okay.
I'm gonna have to stencil some shirts that say "Free Cameron."
Yeah.
So, Madam Chair, my thoughts are this program has been enormous. It's been really helpful. I appreciate the the attention that has been brought by both of these committees are represented in the room today. And we are very eager to make sure that we are continuing to house people who are exiting homelessness while also making sure that these units are coming online for folks who have a housing choice voucher. I've been super impressed by the sort of tertiary or secondary, perhaps, results of this program. A lot of property owners have recognized that they are a real big part of the housing ecosystem, and are not feeling like vilified landlords anymore. They're actually able to make sure that their units are up to code and are being recognized for some of the work that we're doing. We also are keeping very close track. I know that it is of paramount importance that these units are in compliance the entire time. I have a very small crew, but we are working on making sure that we have annual recertifications with each of these property owners, where we understand our program connections to the coordinated entry, so that we know that these are in compliance for their whole time. And then we're going to have, I think, a very interesting, we'll have a lot of information for you at the end of this calendar year, because this will be the first time that we're actually seeing units age out, if you will, of the compliance period. So this has been a little bit like, I'm feeling a little garden energy right now. It feels a little bit like asparagus. We've been cultivating it for like 4 years now, and now we're really going to see what that root system is doing and how that really affects some of our communities. So more than happy to come in again and talk about our program. I'm happy to bring in folks. We have a litany of folks who have utilized this, both tenants and property owners that are very interested. Most people are super excited to continue having successful tenancies with folks that have been sourced or that have been referred by the coordinated entry. So just really appreciate the attention.
Thank you, Sean. You actually brought up an issue that I had written down to ask you about, which is this recertification process. So I don't know if you were just trying to tee me up or what, but
I want to keep things out in the open and not have you have to follow up.
So one of the things, one of the things is that I don't believe that there's any data requirements in the bill.
You're correct. There
are no. I would feel a lot more comfortable if there were reporting back to the legislature on the results, the initial results of the results of the initial 5-year grant / forgivable loan program. I'm mostly, honestly, what I'm trying to do is either to dispel or to confirm, or someplace in between, the concern that individuals would be evicted from units after the 5 years was up. And so that's part of what I hope is part of this recertification process, is like, what has happened to the original tenants? Is there any change? Does the landlord expect to raise the rent? All of those kinds of things. I'm hoping that that's part of your certification process and data that you're collecting.
Yes. So each year a property owner needs to send us a recertification that attests that they're charging the HUD fair market rent or below, and are continuing to rent to an individual that fits the priority criteria. We spot check some of them, including site visits and phone calls, which are sometimes well received. most often people don't want to hear from government, but and then we actually have, as part of this program, there is a covenant that's it's assigned I don't know the legal term. It's a covenant that is it is basically a lien that is recorded with the town records, the land records. So and that is a permanent covenant until we discharge it. So at the end of the 5-year or the 10-year, we require that the property owner reach back out to us to request discharge of that covenant, at which point we will do, again, a back check to figure out if they've actually carried out and have been carried out their expectations and have actually provided us with the documentation. And if it's not the case, then we can continue that covenant. If it is the case, we can certainly ask about where the trouble is asking about where tenants end up. We can certainly ask about whether a tenancy is being terminated at the end of that, but asking for information about where a person goes gets into personally identifiable information, and it would be tough to do, but
Yeah,
but yes,
not so much, I think we're really just trying to do exactly what I, said at the outset, is this, because it is a cost-effective program, and it is a faster to respond and react program. You can create units much faster than we can with developing large-scale projects. And so, there's some benefit to this, but, it's our responsibility to understand whether those benefits outweigh any potential issues. And so, but we only know that with data that you submit. And so, and it's also, when we look at government accountability, just saying this to Chair Mahali, I mean, we try to have measures for government accountability that can show whether or not we're meeting our intended purpose. And so we're trying to include those in legislation. So I don't want to throw another wrench into this, Mark, but you might want to think about a paragraph that speaks to a report on the outcomes achieved.
How would we phrase, I'm writing,
Yeah.
I can't help myself. Okay. So
We don't
if we
need
put
to
it,
do drafting here in committee, but I'm just asking you to consider that.
for what it's worth, if I could jump in real quickly, we do, and it is in statute that it's required that we publish on a quarterly basis the name, town, and grant amount that has been, the name of the property owner, the town that they're in, and the grant amount that has been created or been provided on our website on a, like I said, a quarterly basis. So
Yeah, I've seen that.
Okay.
It doesn't speak to the outcome of actually, in our case, reducing homelessness, So, yeah, I mean, it shows that, you've been efficient at getting the money out to landlords and apartment owners. But the sort of the next step is, it provided more housing, and did it have an impact on the rental vacancy rate in the region or in the community? Did it have an impact on the rate of homelessness in the community? Those are the kinds of things that I think probably they're not just counting the widgets, they're kind of counting the outcomes. So I would encourage you to think about that, Chair Mahali.
received.
Okay.
I mean, I'm actually am looking for language. Because I know just where we would put it. And now is the time for us to do that.
That's
right now. So I'm just going to say, without saying that that's what we would end up with, where it says the department shall annually publish the amount. On the
Yeah.
side, we'd say the department shall report to the committees.
Yeah.
Okay. Information on the amount of the loans or grants for each year in the 5-year program, and the rental status of the units where the 5-year term has expired, or something like that. And if anyone here has any ideas about something like that, shoot me a text now. I mean, soon.
I wouldn't just do it for the 5-year, I'd do it for the 5 and the 10-year for both.
5 and 10, okay.
Would that be rental status and the relationship of the rent to the HUD fair market? So how did it change or remain?
Right, was there a change in rent? Thank you very much, Sean. Appreciate the dialogue around this. And as you said, it has been a successful tool in both creating units, but also helping people to move out of homelessness. So thank you for that work. Committee, this is again a flyover, flyby, drive-through, whatever you want to call it. So really, we're only reacting to, and this will be made clear on the floor, the VHIP section of the bill. So could I see a show of hands so people with the changes that Representative Mahaly will be working on that we've talked about here? Can I see a show of hands of people who are supportive of this language in VHIP? Okay, and those who are opposed? Okay. Thank you very much, Sean and Mark. I appreciate it very much. We'll look forward to seeing this on the floor, and shoot me over some draft language if you want to.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. I think I just want to say, given that our committee is, I think, joined at the hip with your committee and that you deal with homelessness, we'll deal with how do we get them out of homelessness.
And your committee,
I look forward to a more detailed relationship, and I look forward to learning more because a lot of this is new to me.
right, thank you, Mark. I recall you saying that you had a unanimous straw poll out of your committee on this.
I did. We'll see if that endures.
Yeah, I don't think we've made any potential changes that would impact.
No, I don't think so. Thank you.
So that was 11.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Okay, so we're gonna move on to the next topic. H91.
But staying with housing.
We're staying with housing and homelessness and trying to address both and
At least it's
appreciate
not a
it.
complete topic shift.
It's
like
not,
we
yeah,
had
we're
last
not,
biennium.
we're not going to do any sort of whiplash thing. Katie, join us at the table. So folks, you have a very rough draft. I mean, the draft's not rough, but the content is still, in development. So, but Katie, with the absence of internet, due to windstorm, has been trying to work on this, for the last several days, and she has done an admirable job. So this is on our webpage, and if Katie, it would be really great if you just kind of walked us through what we have so far, okay? And
Sorry, could I have Sharon? Thank you. That's okay. So Katie McLaren, Office of Legislative Counsel. Nice to see everyone. The draft should be posted on your website and I'll pull it up. It should be 1.2. And I'm sure before our work is done, we can increase that number.
yeah, oh yeah, it'll be 1.10 or 2.40 or, yeah. Yeah, I know, right?
So this draft, let me just tell you how it's structured a little bit. So we have finding and legislative intent section to start. And then I think it's section 3 creates a new chapter that would be in the green books. It's an ongoing program that creates shelter. The program itself is administered by the Agency of Human Services. There are 3 different sort of levels of shelter that are envisioned within this. And the operators of that service are in the community, of those shelter services are in the community. Excuse me. There's, at the end of that new chapter, there is some language around appropriations and legislative intent around appropriations, including some transitional language. So let's jump in. Findings. The General Assembly finds in Subdivision 1, according to the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development's 2024 Annual Homelessness Assessment Report, Vermont had the 4th highest rate of homelessness in 2024. In that, 53 of every 10,000 Vermonters are experiencing homelessness, with only Hawaii, New York, and Oregon experiencing higher rates. In Subdivision 2, In 2023, according to the same annual homelessness assessment report, 51 of every 10,000 Vermonters were experiencing homelessness. Currently in Vermont, there are approximately 3,458 unhoused individuals, which represents a 300% increase over the 1,110 unhoused individuals prior to COVID in 2020. In 2024, over 35% of those Vermonters experiencing homelessness were unhoused for more than 1 year, and over 72% of the unhoused were unhoused for more than 90 days. Let me make notes as I go through this. Top of page 2, in 2024, 737 of those Vermonters experiencing homelessness were children and youth under 18 years of age, and 646 were 55 years of age or older. And Black Vermonters are 5.6 times more likely to be unhoused as compared to white Vermonters. In terms of
Question?
Yeah.
Sorry, about findings, are those, this obviously comes from studies and so forth. Is that, let's say, referenced in some way?
So some of them are specifically referenced. We
Uh-huh.
can draft them so that the source is referenced in every single one. My practice is that if there's findings in a bill that I pull all of the sources into the official bill file and I find and highlight the,
All right.
I have the
It's all
receipts, I
there.
guess, yeah.
Okay.
I double check.
I know you wouldn't make it up. I don't think that for 1 second, but I just wondered what the practice was. And you just explained it. So
Okay.
thank you very much.
Okay, so section 2, legislative intent. It is the intent of the General Assembly that the Vermont Homeless Emergency Assistance and Responsive Transition to Housing Program, established in 33 VSA Chapter 22, that's the chapter we're going to look at in the next section, is a step towards ensuring that unsheltered homelessness be addressed in Vermont and interim shelter opportunities be available to provide a stable pathway to permanent housing for all Vermonters experiencing homelessness. The Vermont increase the supply of need-specific emergency and transitional shelter, as well as permanent supportive housing that is accessible to individuals with a health condition or disability. That Vermont increase access to supportive housing for families and children. And community components of an emergency and transitional shelter program are integrated in a systemic manner that address unsheltered homelessness. Top of page 3. The arbitrary time limits, night-by-night shelter, relocation between interim shelter sites, and other disruptions in housing stability be eliminated to the extent possible. That Vermont's emergency housing statutes, rules, policies, procedures, and practices incorporate housing first principles. And that non-congregate shelter be used to the extent possible. Then we have language in subsection B that it's the intent of the General Assembly and the new program replaces the provision of emergency housing through the General Assistance Program established in Chapter 21 of Title 33 and the Housing Opportunity Program.
Katie, just because this is new for some of our members, can you explain really what legislative intent does?
Sure. It's aspirational, so it's not per se enforceable, but where it comes into play is kind of providing guidance to those implementing it about how the program should look and why certain decisions were made and the direction that the General Assembly wants to move in. Sometimes that could be used, for example, if an LCAR, if there are rules adopted based on this chapter, the legislative intent would be instructional to LCAR as to whether legislative intent is met. But aspirational.
Does that make it into the Green Book?
Generally not.
Right.
Here it's in session law. Every once in a while, there's legislative intent that feels like very specifically on point or that you'd want to retain it for a while to understand the language, in which case we might have it as a note in the Green Books, but otherwise it would be in the Red Books. Yeah. Okay. So section 3 is the creation of the new chapter. So we have our title and then we start with the definitions. In this chapter, commissioner means the commissioner. Did we go back to department? We did go back to department.
You did.
I had forgotten. So commissioner means the commissioner for children and families. Community-based shelter means a shelter that meets the Vermont Housing Opportunity Grant Program standards of provision of assistance. This is the definition that's been in the budget this current year, and it's what you proposed for next fiscal year. Department means DCF. Extreme weather event means extreme hot or cold temperatures or weather events such as hurricanes, lightning storms, tornadoes, flooding or blizzards that create hazardous conditions for outdoor habitation by humans. Homeless means lacking a fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence. Household means an individual and any dependents for whom the individual is legally responsible and who live in Vermont. Household includes individuals who reside together in one economic unit, including those who are married, parties to a civil union, or unmarried. And again, that definition is what is currently used in the current year's budget. And then we have this concept of a regional resource organization. So it means an organization designated by the department to lead the assigned region's response to preventing and addressing unsheltered homelessness. And we'll learn much more about regional resource organizations as we dive in. So the next section,
Can I just
pause? Yep,
second?
please.
These definitions are a combination of definitions that are in H91 and that were in the bill that we passed last year, as well as obviously regional resource organization is a new concept. So that is new. But homeless, the definition of homeless is taken directly from the HUD definition of homeless. When looking at this, we were trying to not have so much of this is governed by HUD and access, coordinated entry. And, I don't know what's going to happen to HUD in the long term. I have no idea, but so wanted to keep some things consistent as much as possible.
And I just want to clarify, it's HUD category 1 definition of homelessness. There's 4 categories like homeless under other federal statutes and
Yes.
things like that. So
Yes.
that's imminent risk of homelessness. If it's going to be less than 14 days, you're still considered. So this is the called literal homeless definition.
Thank you. And I just want to apologize. I have to go down to appropriations at a little before 2:30. So if I get up and leave, you'll know why.
The next section, 2202, establishes the program. So in that intro language, we have that the program is established in the department. It shall be composed of, and then we have a list of the different elements of the program. So first, a grant program operated by a statewide organization representing municipalities under contract with the department to provide congregate shelter during extreme weather events pursuant to a section we're going to look at in a few minutes. Next, temporary emergency shelters operated or caused to be operated by regional resource organizations pursuant to a section we'll look at in a little bit. And the third piece is transitional shelters operated or caused to be operated by the regional resource organizations. And again, we'll look at that in a little bit more detail. So turning to that first component in 2203, extreme weather event shelter. The department is to contract with a statewide organization representing municipalities for the operation of shelters throughout the state that shall be used by the organization during extreme weather events to shelter any homeless individual who presents themselves at the shelter. I guess it's worth flagging that the language here is any individual, and you'll see for the other 2 components, there's an eligibility list. So this 2203 is separate from that eligibility list. A shelter offered pursuant to this section during an extreme weather event may include time-limited congregate accommodations. In subsection B, the department is to adopt guidance for the organization representing municipalities that's under contract with the department regarding when extreme weather event shelters are to be operated. In subsection C, the department is to maintain a website with the locations of all extreme weather event shelters. 2204 is the second of the 3 elements that were listed previously. This is the emergency temporary shelter. So this is a regional resource organization, remember, under our definition, this is an organization designated by the department to do this work, is to serve eligible households in its service area who are in need of services of a temporary emergency shelter in a manner that it deems best meets the needs of that service area. A regional resource organization may provide or cause to be provided temporary emergency shelter through community-based shelters, temporary use of hotels or motels, lease agreements for full or partial use of an existing building, need-specific shelter arrangements, or other arrangements or combination of arrangements that comply with the intent of this chapter. And then 2205 is the third piece, the third item on the list we looked at, the third component of the program. A regional resource organization shall serve eligible households in its service area in need of services of a permanent shelter in the manner it deems best to meet the needs of the service area. The regional resource organization may provide or cause to be provided permanent shelter through master grant leases, developing shelter capacity or other arrangements or combinations of arrangement that comply with the intent of that chapter. So that change has to be made in two places. We're noting that a previous version had called the transitional shelter permanent shelter, and we're updating lines 7 and 9 to be transitional shelter. So that is
Not the intent that people live there permanently.
right.
Yeah.
Transitional.
Oh, I see.
Yeah, I didn't change it there. Okay. Thank you. Next in 2206 is language about case management services. The regional resource organization shall offer or cause to be offered case management services to unhoused or precariously housed individuals or households in its service area, including household needs assessment, individualized household plans to address identified needs, assistance obtaining and retaining housing, including financial assistance, referrals to other services and supports, mediation with landlords, advocacy and progress monitoring, and interventions. And then in 2207, we have our eligibility list. You'll see this list should look very familiar to you at this point. This is the list that's currently in the budget, and it's what you proposed for fiscal year 26's budget. But the lead-in language is different. So regional resource organizations shall provide or cause to be provided temporary emergency housing and transitional housing. So that refers to the two sections, 2204 and 2205. And they're providing this to households that attest to a lack of fixed, regular, and adequate nighttime residence and have a member who, to go over this list, is 65 years of age or older, a member that has a disability that can be documented in one of the following ways: a receipt of SSI or SSDI, or the use of a form developed by the department as a means of documenting a qualifying disability that requires the applicant's name, date of birth, and at least last four digits of the applicant's social security number or other identifying number, description of the applicant's disability or health condition, a description of the risk posed to the applicant's health, safety, or welfare if temporary emergency housing is not authorized, and a certificate of a healthcare provider that includes the provider's credentials, credential number, address, phone number. Back to the list, a member who is a child 19 years of age or under, has a member that is pregnant, has a member that has experienced the death of a spouse, domestic partner, or minor child that caused the household to lose its housing, has a member that has experienced a natural disaster such as a flood, fire, hurricane, has a member that's under a court-ordered eviction or constructive eviction due to circumstances over which the household had no control, or has a member who is experiencing domestic violence, dating violence, sexual assault, stalking, human trafficking, hate violence, or other dangerous or life-threatening conditions that relate to violence against the individual or household member that caused the household to lose its housing. So that's the eligibility for the last two, the components of the program. And then we get into more detail about what it entails to be a regional resource organization in 2208. The department is to designate a regional resource organization within each service area of the state to serve or cause to have served eligible households that are experiencing homelessness or that are precariously housed by providing temporary emergency shelter, transitional shelter, other supportive services pursuant to the sections we looked at above. The department shall conduct a redesignation review of each regional resource organization at least every 3 years. In subsection B, a regional resource organization shall have existing infrastructure to support eligible households in the service area, including an established leadership team, human resources staff, and the ability to receive grant funding and issue subgrants. It's to have the ability to meet the department's reporting requirements, including past history of reporting compliance, have community connections with other providers in the region, including providers of coordinated entry, mental health and disability services, substance use disorder services, and services for older Vermonters. And it has to be a community action agency. Subsection C gets into the funding mechanism. The department is to consult with regional resource organizations to develop appropriate resource allocations. The resource allocation shall take economic indicators for rate of homelessness, rental vacancy rates, and other variables into account as appropriate. And annually, the department is to distribute funding to each regional resource organization using the allocation developed pursuant to the previous subdivision. If the department and regional resource organizations agree, the department may disperse one joint allocation for all of the regional resource organizations, which then the organizations will decide how to distribute amongst themselves. In subsection D, the department is to consult with the regional resource organizations to develop appropriate measures and methods for accountability of all regional resource organizations. The regional resource organization shall provide any previously agreed upon information to enable the department to evaluate the services provided through grant funds, the effect on households receiving services, and accounting expended grant funds. In 2209, this looks at planning needs and needs assessment. So in subsection A, at least every 3 years, beginning on January 15th, 2030, the regional resource organization shall jointly develop a regional needs assessment for use in each organization's service area to inform future plans to address housing and homelessness in each service area. Each plan shall address progress in reducing the number of households experiencing homelessness in the service area, assess the rate households placed in permanent housing return to homelessness and the underlying reasons, identify resources developed and utilized in the service area to address homelessness, determine the rate of household compliance with coordinated entry processes, identify system gaps in the funding needed to address those gaps, including periodic inflationary adjustments, and lastly, utilize existing information informed by the point in time count produced by a statewide homeless advocacy organization, coordinated entry assessment results, and community conversations. And then in subsection B, each regional resource organization is to submit the plans developed pursuant to the previous subsection to the General Assembly. And then we have language specific to the use of hotel and motel rooms. So as you gathered through the previous sections of this, the use of hotel and motel rooms is optional. A regional resource organization could use that as one method of providing shelter if it chooses to. If they are used, this provides some parameters. So first we have language that hotels and motels providing temporary emergency shelter or transitional shelter. Those are the two categories, the second two categories of the program. They have to comply with various rules. We have general assistance rules listed, and I don't think we want to do that anymore. But we have the lodging establishment rules and Vermont Fire and Building Safety Code. And this is language that was pulled from current year's budget and what you proposed for this coming year's budget. Let me slide that. Okay, like that. And then in subsection B, annually, the department shall propose hotel and motel rates as part of its budget presentation for approval by the General Assembly. A regional resource organization shall not pay more than shall not pay more on a per room per night basis than the rate approved by the General Assembly. The organization may enter into contracts for the use of blocks of hotel and motel rooms and negotiate the conditions for use of those blocks, including access to providers for case management and other supportive services. And then in section 4, is the creation, so that's the end of that chapter. So that is what would be in the green books. Section 4 creates an advisory committee. It's a time limited advisory committee. So this would be separate and in session law. You'll see when we get down to the effective dates that whereas section 3 takes effect the year out, the rest of the bill, including this advisory committee, would be forming July 1, 2025. So we're creating the advisory committee to provide advice and recommendation to DCF and the regional resource organizations regarding the design, implementation, and transition to the new program. And then we have membership. The advisory committee's membership shall reflect the growing diversity among Vermonters, including individuals for Black, Indigenous, and persons of color, as well as with regard to socioeconomic status, geographic location, gender, sexual identity, and disability status, and shall be composed of 5 individuals with lived experience of homelessness appointed by the lead coordinated entry agency, 2 individuals representing the regional resource organizations appointed by the community action agencies, a representative of the coordinated entry agency in Chittenden County, a representative of the remaining coordinated entry organizations in the state appointed by the Housing and Homelessness Alliance of Vermont, the commissioner of DCF or designee, deputy commissioner of economic services or designee, commissioner of Dale or designee, commissioner of mental health or designee, commissioner of corrections or designee, commissioner of health or designee, and a representative appointed by the Vermont Care Partners. So that's the DOs and SSAs. What was that?
That's out.
That's out.
Yeah.
So I'm at the bottom of page 13. In subsection C, the advisory committee is to have the administrative, technical, and legal assistance of DCF. In terms of meetings, the commissioner shall call the first meeting to occur on or before July 15th, 26. That's just opposite of what I just said. Top of page 14, the committee shall select a chair or co-chairs from among its members at the first meeting. And a majority of the membership shall constitute a quorum. Members of the advisory committee shall be entitled to per diem compensation and reimbursement for expenses for not more than 12 meetings annually, and these payments shall be made from monies appropriated to the department. And we have a sunset that the advisory committee shall cease to exist on July 1, 2029. I pulled that from last year's draft, but I'm not sure if that's the date that you'll set on. And then you have appropriation language in section 5. So this is to recognize that there'll be some expenses related to transitioning from the existing GA system to this new system. So in fiscal year 26, 10 million of one-time funding is appropriated as follows. 5 million to DCF for distribution to the regional resource organizations, 500,000 to DCF for contractual and other system transformation assistance, and then 4.5 million to DCF for the continued development of need-specific housing throughout the state, such as recovery housing, housing for individuals with disabilities, family housing, and transitional housing for individuals exiting the custody of the Commissioner of Corrections. Section 6, we have language about future appropriations, but this is legislative intent language because we usually don't bind the hands of future legislatures by appropriating future monies. So it is the intent of the General Assembly that in fiscal year 27 and thereafter, funds used in fiscal year 25 for general assistance emergency housing and HOP be redesignated for this new program. Maybe we should say something like equivalent funds used in fiscal year.
All the same ones.
Yeah, right.
Great.
Yeah, we figured out. this. We have to-
and dryer,
That's
you know,
right.
recycle the money.
We can spend the same dollar 3 or 4 different times in this.
Oh, yeah, there sure is. Thank you. Okay. And then we have our effective date. So this takes effect July 1, 2025, except the new chapter itself takes effect July 1, 2026. So that is a year out, and all the planning happens this coming fiscal year. And then where this lines 11 through 13 is just renaming the act to reflect what is actually in the bill once it passes.
Thank you, Katie. I appreciate that, and all the work you've done in the last few days. I want to own up that this name is not anything that I'm particularly tied to, but it comes from HUD, the HEARTH program. Only they had the R is rapid, and I'm like, I'm not pretty sure we can't guarantee rapid. Anyways, I just wanted to know where it came from. So it's
Suggestions welcome.
from other hearts, yes, other suggestions welcome. So this was a lot to take in one sitting, and it's all new information, and there are lots of people listening to this conversation, and I have been meeting with various individuals who have a opinion or have a stake or have a thought. I don't know how you want to say it, but so I've met with Monica Hutt from the governor's office. I've met with Secretary Samuelson. I've had 2 meetings with community action agencies. Talked to some advocates. Talked to the department. It's a big change. So it is something that deserves a lot of careful thought. It puts the department back into the area of responsibility that a lot of the rest of the Agency of Human Services is in, which is to monitor and provide oversight, to do the systems kind of thinking. I recently received an email from the state auditor's office saying, they're in looking at, I found it interesting that they were looking at coordinated entry data. I don't know how they came about to be looking at that. But noticed, as we saw here, when folks were testifying, that the rate of re-homelessness, so people moving into permanent housing and then becoming homeless again. And when the auditor's office reached out to the department, I think they, they felt like the department would be more responsive in terms of understanding what are the reasons, what do we know about that, what are we looking at to see what's missing, why are people becoming homeless again? Was it rents were too high? Was it they didn't have the supportive services? Was it the location? Was it some other thing? So those are the kinds of things that the department would be doing under this. And there's still some questions, there's still some pieces to fill in, but it's the general concept of utilizing resources that the level that are appropriate in FY25 to transition out to regional organizations that right now, I don't know if it's going to end up that way by this time on Friday afternoon, but right now they're identified as community action agencies. what I'd love for you to be able to do is to sort of sit with this a bit. I have to go downstairs to appropriations, and if you have questions of Katie about like, what does something mean, I'm sure that she would answer them for you. But then this is as much for the people sitting around the outside as well as ourselves, that this is just a starting point. You know, this will have many different iterations as we work through language and we think about things to be covered. And we hear from different entities, advocates, organizations, the department, sort of all of the above. So spend some time thinking about it, spend some time with the language, spend some time thinking about things that you think should be included that aren't here. I think an implementation plan, report back to the legislature next year, probably in February, an implementation plan. I thought about that as we were going through it, would be something that should be added. Yeah, can I answer any questions for anybody? Yeah, go ahead, Brenda.
The money's here, is that the total amount to implement this? I already have a note into the joint fiscal office, but maybe offhand the full cost of implementing this bill?
At the FY 25 levels. So right now there's $44.6 million in the GA, what we call the GA motel program.
And that's just for 25?
That's for fiscal year 25.
Okay.
And I don't have the housing opportunity, the HOP program. I don't have that number off the top of my head. But
is this in the governor's budget?
Yes,
it's already in there.
Yeah, it's in the 25 budget.
Okay, and then the FY 26, is that in the budget?
In the FY 26 budget, the governor has increased the amount for HOP by about $5 million, 3 and 2, something like that. And then has decreased the amount for the hotel program to 30.5 million in one time and 8.1 million in base.
And this would stay within that budget, it wouldn't go above?
What we're proposing here, which we voted on our budget memo, was to stay within the FY 25, our current year right now, to not go above what our current year is right now.
Right, I know, but FY 26 that we
No.
already put in.
No, what we put in our budget memo and what this is based on is FY 25 funding levels. So the year that we're in now, not FY 26.
Okay.
Any other questions? Yeah, go ahead, Doug.
2 questions. One, are we meeting as a group again when you return, or are we working on this on our own for the remainder of the day?
I am going to be gone for probably an hour and a half. So I would say no. That we want. I mean, you all can continue to meet and discuss, and Ray can and Ann can sort of lead you in a discussion here about different things. I don't know how much time Katie has. Yeah, okay. So that's perfectly fine.
And then one substantive question, and if you prefer to defer it to a later conversation, that's fine. The extreme weather event shelters seem to fall under the auspices of the statewide organization representing municipalities versus the other 2 forms of shelters through the RROs, who might as well start using one go. Is there a reason why we wouldn't have the RROs run all 3 types of shelters?
Good question to have discussion. I mean, the way this is structured is, through VLCT. And it just being that municipalities would have some access to resources that they don't really have much access to now, to stand up something that is really extreme weather shelter. And Katie pointed out that essentially that's, for any homeless person that comes, a la.
It's kind of a different level.
It's a different level. It's not intended to be a program per se, it's intended to be very short term and to, for the municipality to use, or that they can contract with somebody else to do it. They don't have to do it themselves. But it's putting resources out there that they haven't had in the past. So But, open to discussion about what people think is the best way to do it and whether that is, the state granting that, or, I guess it could be the regional, it's just that, I would envision sort of a grant program that VLCT might set up to, receive applications from municipalities. So like, Colchester, Rutland, wherever, to, address, extreme weather events. Yeah, but like I said, this is all open for discussion, and we will have lots of discussion. Speaking of which, let's just look at the schedule. Tomorrow at 9, yes. Yeah. We are going to pick this right back up, and then after floor, we're also going to pick this right back up. And in between, I'm just giving us a little bit of a break. We're going to hear from a couple of folks on brief bill introductions, just so we can see what might be ahead of us after crossover. Okay? All right.
Do folks want to stay, Katie, for a few minutes and ask questions about what we just heard? Or do you want to kind of work on your own to kind of digest what we heard and then like do questions? You're with us tomorrow morning? So just want to, we have time and we have Katie, if we want to stay together. Go ahead, Esmond.
I don't want to keep you too long, but I also maybe have one question. I don't know if others do as well, but, so obviously one of the most robust pieces of this bill in general, and one of the biggest changes is the state mandated broader case management requirements that we have, because we're not seeing follow through for the people that we're, investing resources in and not knowing what works and what's not working. So I want to be conscientious and to make sure that we are having a lot of, like the expectations of what we're asking case managers to do are very clear, and to have the ability to have a lot of follow-up with that. So I was trying to find language in the bill as to where we communicate that and what the department will talk about with case managers and how that relationship will be, because it will be more robust after this bill goes through, if it goes through.
Yeah.
Exactly. So I'm just looking for very specific pieces. So one of the only places, unless I'm missing something, I found this was on page 9, which is number 2, which is saying that our case management group should have
difference.
Okay, so never mind. Well, what I interpreted was that they should have the ability to meet the department's reporting requirements. So maybe this is not even related to that. But I guess hopefully it's making sense what I'm asking for. But is there any language in the bill that is very clearly stating what we expect from case managers and how the two will work in tandem together, the department with these organizations we're not just checking a box saying, oh, everybody has a case manager.
Case management.
Well, I think
Yeah,
the
page
way it's
6, which is
set
very
up
wide.
to be, at least for now, is the department sets overall standards, and then we have these, like right now, we have 5 CAP agencies in our state. So the way it currently is those CAP agencies must meet those requirements. So if for, let's say, a CAP agency, you had the reporting requirement, if they didn't meet that, I think they wouldn't be eligible to hold this contract, or they would have to rectify that situation. And then, so they kind of are the resource organization. But there's other organizations in their region. So they'll then, it's giving kind of local control. And then I think they are more the ones who will then have that relationship with the case managers directly.
And then where does this state?
But it's not in there. You're right. I believe we need more
Yeah, so
robust expectations.
Some intent about what the legislature hopes, that there will be case
Yeah.
management in every instance of a person we meet.
Yeah,
What the
it fits
minimum
under that.
standards are for
Yeah,
the case
agreed.
management
Needs a
and
lot
what the
more
coordination
robust
is.
description there.
Go ahead, Doug.
He catch up with their writing when they refer to a page.
Because right now, rather than having that interim, we do have the department just kind of working with all of the organizations. So this is setting up kind of 3.
So under 2206 on page 6, starting with line 12, there is shall language, the regional resource organization shall offer or cause to be offered case management households or precariously housed, unhoused or precariously housed households in its service area, including households, needs assessment, etc.
Mhm.
Is a shall implied before the including, or is it, or they shall offer case management,
Mhm.
including the following? So
Yes,
does
I
the
would-
shall
that would
follow the
require-
including?
Yes.
So we are at least setting forth a requirement that case management include household needs assessment, individualized household plans to identify needs, et cetera. That is in that paragraph.
Yes.
And then, so for the oversight piece, like how is that then communicated to the state? Is it on like a just random, like we'll ask for it and you gotta be ready for
There's a
it?
reportage
basis, or-
requirement.
That's, I think that's in the part you were
Okay.
pointing
Yeah.
to.
Oh, I see.
Before.
Okay, and so yeah, I'd be curious where, maybe this is a question for you, Pete, but where those are defined, the reporting requirements, or if that's just something that's not yet been defined and that will help create.
That's how you get funding. How's that work?
Yeah, yeah.
To the question.
Sorry.
That's okay.
To catch up where you are. So you're on page 9. This is the regional assessment. Sorry, which subdivision are you looking at on page 9?
It would be starting with D.
Thank you.
That's the measures for accountability, which are not listed yet, but could be fleshed out more there.
Yeah, so this is leaving it to the department and the organizations themselves to determine what the most appropriate measures are,
Yeah. To evaluate the services provided.
which is a policy choice. You don't, I mean, you could go with that. You could come up with your own specific parameters.
Yeah. Well, I think for purposes of discussion, just that should be considered, like what is working, what is not working? And I know unfortunately, we don't have as much data as we want from follow through from a start of a person's journey to the end through all the different.
I think we can be a little bit more specific.
Yeah,
about
it shall
what
include at
measures.
least.
Yeah, at the
And
minimum.
identify some minimum things that we want to make sure they do, and that doesn't keep them from doing more.
Yeah, and maybe room for flexibility as like if something is not working, then we adjust. Because we don't want to just keep funneling resources into something that's not serving. So,
Yeah, so I just want to make sure I understand that correctly. Under the way this is set up now, the funds that used to be or currently hot funds would only be eligible, the only people that they could be attributed towards are those folks in the eligibility category.
That's a little tricky because money is fungible. So when you're pulling in 2 pots of money, you're pulling in the GA money and you're pulling in the hot money. So there is a population that will be served in the extreme weather.
Yeah.
And they don't have any eligibility
Yeah, but for
requirements. But for the other 2 pieces of the program, yes, they have to meet the eligibility
So-
requirements.
In my head, I'm thinking about Spectrum. Just an example, we just put money last biennium to build a shelter. And that was one-time money, but they receive ongoing hot funds for the operation of that shelter. And that shelter serves youth 18 to 24. Under this mechanism that they'll have to find other funding. Unless they're serving youth who meet some kind of other part of that. Is that correct?
If they don't fit into the eligibility criteria, then yes.
And that there's other subpopulations that
That
are
we want
like,
to look at, yep.
yeah, that we're gonna want to consider, I think now.
and
Go ahead, Doug.
I wonder if we have any thoughts we want to share in the implementation for this of sort of the division of the funds, back to the extreme weather event shelters. We saw that in response to the unhousing of people last fall, the state went out and spent a lot of money very quickly on these types of shelters. It didn't seem very efficient. So how much do we want of this total pot of money to be spent on that to ensure that it doesn't gobble up more than our intention? I don't know how we do that, but
Katie taking notes.
Yeah, and I,
Gobble up.
then I know
I'll quote here.
A loop there too that connects maybe to that
Okay,
question.
so I think Esme, then Anne, then Son.
Oh, I don't think I had anything on that point, but
Anne, go ahead.
thank you.
Sure, then I'm trying to sort out some of the, actually what was talked about a little bit now, but looking at that whole bottom of page 8, what the regional resources are designated to do. And as was pointed out, it's only eligible populations. But it talks eligible households that are experiencing homelessness or that are precariously housed, which is a kind of different subpopulation maybe than homeless, because we don't define precariously housed elsewhere. But also, when we're talking about the other supportive services, that includes that case management that has to do with identifying needs, retaining housing, housing retention, which would not be people who are experiencing homelessness.
Yeah.
And that's connected to that supportive services. So again, people for retention of housing, you're only eligible for that kind of supportive service if you're an eligible household. So we're sort of internally not being consistent. I don't know how to fix that. I'm just saying.
Yeah, no, I think
it's a little
that's a
bit.
good point. I think precariously housed is meant to capture the set of services that fall into more of the case management type services and outside of this shelter services. But the
Commonly known as diversion.
well taken.
Yeah.
Son.
Well, so the point that I had that sort of feels like a little bit similar kind of loop is for me on page 8. See, page 8, line 4. It talks about a person who's eligible has experienced a natural disaster, such as whatever. It talks about natural disasters as being eligible for all 3 of these types of housing. Yet we have the one type that's specific to natural disasters.
So
does it sort of?
Yeah, so I think the first type of shelter, the extreme weather one, isn't necessarily meant to respond to somebody who is in the process, has experienced a natural disaster in the past.
Just
But like,
extreme weather.
it's
It's not
like-
necessarily a disaster.
it's to get them out indoors immediately
Out of the
because
sun,
there's
yeah.
an immediate threat.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right.
So, Katie, I don't know if you know the definition off the top of your head, or I wonder about inclusion here rather than by reference. Community-based shelter refers to the HOP program.
Standards.
And I
Yeah.
don't know how that's defined there. I don't know how, if we could include it here.
So I think that definition needs some consideration by this committee. Well, one, it's like I don't know, I have a PDF, it's multiple pages, so it's not a simple definition. But if you're using this program to replace HOP, but then at the same time, you're saying a shelter is what HOP says it is, that's kind of circular. So I think you need to think through what standards make sense to you.
And are you aware, it doesn't appears that term is used in the emergency temporary shelter section, but not in the extreme weather event shelter or the transitional
Okay.
shelter. And I don't know if that's intentional. I don't.
I think it's intentional
Yeah.
to be omitted in the extreme weather because the HOP standards, I believe, and you'll correct me if I'm wrong, are non-congregate. But the transitional shelter should include community-based shelter.
Katie.
Okay.
So the funding that's gonna go to the community action agencies in this iteration or the RROs, which have to be a community action agency. In this iteration, is it meant to be like equally distributed between, or is it? It's so interesting. Okay.
So that language, where is the language where it talks about how funds are distributed? Give me a minute. I'm still getting used to this also. Okay, no, C, page 9C. The department shall consult with the regional resource organizations to develop appropriate resource allocations. So it very much leaves it up to the department and ROs to work out. And then it says you have to take into account economic indicators, rate of homelessness. There's room for more specificity if you want, less specificity. But one thing to, sort of the conversation around, this appropriation, we were thinking back to the, parent-child, center network. Yeah. And at one point there were separate, payments to each parent-child center. And now there's legislation a couple of years ago to create a network, and now the appropriation is made to the network, and the network decides how the funds are appropriated. So this kind of is a hybrid because it says you're gonna give each RRO its own appropriation, but then it says, but if everyone is in agreement, you could just do the lump sum to all the RROs and they can decide.
That's number 2.
Yeah.
So,
Go ahead, Jubilee.
yeah, I have a question and I can ask Teresa. I just wondered if you have known her thought process on the regional planning needs assessment.
Huh.
It's like at least every 3 years, beginning on January 15th, 2030. Do you know her
That was
thinking?
my thinking. So my thinking is that it doesn't take, we're not implementing the program till July 1, 2026. So then you have a full year of data. I was trying to give 3 full years of data before doing the assessment. If the idea is that every 3 years you're redoing
The
this
first one would be a full 3 years.
Yeah. Not set in stone.
Okay, yeah, I mean, my thinking, it's just like, we should have one and just.
As a
I have
baseline.
to do, I have to do them every 5 years for my, and part of like, when you get a new application is you've got to have an initial needs assessment. To start with as part of okay, that's confusing.
Brenda, I'm still on the last part where we were talking about lump sums, et cetera. So like all the money would go to CBOEO and they would disperse it? Is that what you mean?
It would go collectively to the RROs, to the cap.
RROs?
Yeah,
Regional resource.
the regional resource organizations. It doesn't specify if there would be like a point person or an entity or a lead office that would take that. I don't know how it would be structured, but the idea is that the 5, I guess, organizations that are doing this work would decide amongst themselves how to appropriate the money and where the needs were instead of have the department.
See, I think it should like all go to CBOEO.
It doesn't say 5 anywhere, but I was thinking there are 5 regions right now. That's why 5.
There's 5 community action agencies.
Oh, that's what I meant. Okay. Oh, so you meant those 5. I thought you meant some other.
Some of it also goes to the municipalities, right? Those grants are also part of that. money.
Yeah, the component one is municipalities.
Right.
Okay.
So that's that total bucket of money includes the regional organizations, but also whatever the amount that would go to the
directly to-
municipality.
And then they decide where they get
And
That's
dispersed.
not clear yet, but.
Yeah.
No, actually, that was a question I had.
Okay.
I don't see, under the appropriations, I don't see any appropriations for the municipal extreme weather.
Yeah, that was, I don't think it is. I think that's the point I was making earlier is
Okay.
you want to be leaving it open-ended runs the risk of it sort of gobbling up more money than we would like for longer term services.
That's with the.
Right, but there is none there for that.
Right. So setting an amount or somehow.
Yeah.
So for just 1 second.
Yeah, sorry.
This is open discussion, but I will ask for one person at a time.
Yeah,
People
yeah.
are listening online and it's really challenging to hear and understand what we're saying if multiple people are talking at the same time. Go ahead, Katie, sorry.
That's okay. So section 5 is just the transition. So you might want to give transition funding this year to municipalities to prepare for the extreme weather. That's not addressed here. But in section 6, it doesn't say, I mean, it gives money equivalent, I'm on page 15.
Thank you.
It gives equivalent money from fiscal year 25 to the program. The program includes the cold weather, or I shouldn't say cold weather, the extreme weather shelters. So they're not excluded there, but it doesn't say, you're getting 10% and you're getting, yeah.
Other questions?
Well, I just have a kind of structural question. I mean, about how this, again, I'm just trying to get my head wrapped around this. So it seems to me that this is a big change, as Teresa talked about. And so there's a lot of, we're trying to put together many things. It feels a little bit to me, just an observation, that it's kind of focused on where the pots of money are now and how do we put that together. But I'm wondering if the legislation should be so dependent on where the money's coming from right now. That's my question. I mean, are we getting what we really want from intent is what I'm asking. And then we figure the dollars out later. Does that make sense?
Are we limiting ourselves?
Yeah, are we sort of crabbing it in a certain way that we may not want later in 5 years? I don't know.
I think that's shares. I think that's a conversation. As to why she.
Tomorrow morning, we'll
Okay.
have
Because you're correct. It is structured that way and.
yeah. Katie, do you have anything to add to that? Any thoughts?
Yeah. That's not a cake. Because it's a policy.
Eric, go ahead.
Yeah, I don't have a question. It's more of, and I need to digest all of this a little bit further, but just when Mary was speaking, I'm trying to wrap my head around, how's this program? I see a lot of obligations, commitments, and responsibilities that are going to be placed upon the state as well as the providers. But I'm not really seeing that language in there that's placing other responsibilities, obligations, and commitments upon the recipient. So we take into context the coordinated case managers. We'll divert it more to a program at some level of, and we heard this from testimony about the Housing First, the importance of active engagement with that coordinated entry, that developing an individualized service plan to expedite them out of their current situation. So again, it's just food for thought to put on out there. I still want to digest a lot of the information that's on here, and then I'll have more questions going forward. But I felt it was important to point that out. I'm still trying to, I don't see how this is it still seems to me to be a benefit.
I had similar thoughts to that, and I wrote down like, what are the minimum expectations for the either the municipalities and or the resource.
Regional resource.
Regional resource. Like we don't have that currently in this draft, that's not really laid out specifically. What, right, like these are the services that you must provide. This is what we expect that you do with this funding. So those things I feel like we need to do more work on.
Absolutely. The concept is great. I think we're on the right track. But I'd like to know buts. You never use the word, well, you also never use the word hope, because my theory with hope is if you're saying you have hope in this, it means you got no plan. So to be able to see it, that one-stop shop, that coordinated entry through through what did they, this acronym stuff's gonna drive me crazy.
Regional resources.
Regional.
RROs.
That's your direct conduit. No, they're responsible for like referring on out to other agencies, that one-stop connection where an individual that's participating or receiving these things are not chaotically, being passed around the community. That direct connection, whether it's, we use the word mandatory, active, whatever the case may be, direct correlation with them. And I think we might be able to put together a very effective program that's going to serve the population we're looking to serve.
And I mean, also for example, I saw you, but like we brought up the parent-child centers already, where like they're statewide organizations across the state, and they have like a list of 8 core services that they have to provide, right? So it doesn't matter what community, what parent-child center you walk into, you know that they can offer more services, but so that to me is missing from this right now. Like, we don't have a list of if somebody is just going to CVOEO versus NECA, do they know that they're getting the same exact, like, at the minimum, these services that will help them, move forward and get them housed and connect them to the right services.
Absolutely, and through that connection with their coordinated entry provider, if they're developing an individualized service plan reflective of their needs and their risk, they'll notice within there like, oh, something, here's a great relevant service that we can direct you on to utilize on that end. I just don't want to see a multitude of agencies coming on in and more or less expressing, I'm working with this client, or I'm working with this client. It's like, whoa. It's going to get chaotic. And what's going to end up happening is the people that are going to fall through the cracks. And that's another thing. I don't think any of us want to see that happen. Just some more comment. Thank you.
So I might be totally confused, but so DCF, as we know, emergency housing will be gone with this. So DCF's out of the picture.
Well, they're responsible for administering the program, but they're administering it by contracting with different agencies to provide the services.
Which, to be fair, that is really the role of the state departments. Like in other state departments, they're not as heavily involved in that relationship-based work with clients. ESD is unusual in that and this problem has become so large that a lot of the resources from DCF are going to this case management, which traditionally should not be the responsibility of a state agency. They're they should be more responsible to implement and oversight and accountability and implementation, grant out to those services to community organizations to do it.
So DCF won't have what they used to call, it was case management, and that went to priority management. So they're going to go back to case management and get rid of the from years ago, priority management.
I mean, what this draft envisions is having the regional resource organizations as the point entity responsible for making sure
Case management is much better than priority because they get to know their client and they're not like, meeting people that don't even know them.
And to that,
I like case manager.
The regional resource organizations, because they're regional, they will be responsible for providing or making sure case management services are provided because they are.
Priority was not fair because they didn't get to know their people.
That guy.
Wondering if there is a drafting or other rationale as to why we would talk about regional resource organizations and then list they shall, and the fourth one of the shall says be a community action agency. Is there a reason why we don't just say community action agencies?
We're trying.
Eventually.
I mean,
Probably, I'm sorry. No, that's it.
I was asked to add it to the list, so I added it to the list.
Okay.
We can talk about that tomorrow in markup. Eric?
I was just going to comment on that, but as you mentioned, we have 5 throughout the state. Well, there's obviously other counties probably have some other type of preferred provider or a provider that could manage if asked upon to be that.
I believe
organization.
the 5 community action agencies, and you can correct me if I'm wrong,
Very regional.
cover the
Yeah.
entire state though.
They do.
So there's 5, but they're statewide, so they cover every region of the state.
Yeah. And in this case, less is more.
Right, yeah. Any other questions?
Just, I may be confused with like another bill. I thought that when I was looking through, there was a spot where there was a reference development of or whatever that mentioned recovery residences and there's no.
No, there'd be a reference. I mean, it talks about Um,
It's in the housing, it may have been in the housing bill that we just looked at before. It was a section that referenced a
that
couple.
bill does, the last page of that bill has a appropriation.
Not losing it.
Opioid abatement to the recovery.
It was. Good.
And Katie,
Because I was trying to find it again.
And now.
did you catch page 15, line 1, misspelling the appropriation?
I did, thank you.
We didn't talk about this, I just want to make sure.
I appreciate it.
Yeah. Lots of P's. Yeah, lots of P's and R's in that one. All right. Any last questions for Katie? All right, thank you all. We'll pick this up at 9 a.m. tomorrow.